It's Peter from Microseismic Inc., and I'm welcoming you to this second in our podcast on energizing tomorrow. Need to tell you a little story. Microseismic Inc. has been running a user forum for the last 12 to 15 years, and we were really proud this year with the program we had put together. Unfortunately, Mother Nature came in and had a freeze. They don't happen often in Houston, but they did this year. And that freeze made us have to cancel the program. We probably weren't going to have an audience, and we felt not like talking to ourselves. But every cloud has a silver lining, and we managed to talk all of our presenters who put talks together into appearing monthly now in what we're calling our Energizing Tomorrow podcast. We did one in January with Arjun Murthy, who was our guest speaker, our keynote address. He gave a fabulous talk about the state of the industry worldwide from his perspective. We had a great hour-long presentation, or a 40-minute presentation, and then a question period. You can catch that talk and the questions on, well, we're going to turn off her mail, right? So she's not getting notices. You can catch that on our website. If you go to www.microseismic.com and under events, you go to virtual talks and you can catch Arjun's talk. I really think you will enjoy it. We got an awful lot of good feedback. Today, we're going to our reservoir engineering panel, or our engineering panel, and we've got two fabulous speakers. We're so privileged to have them today, and I know you're going to enjoy this talk. We've got Garrett Fowler, who is the Chief Operating Officer at ResFrac. ResFrac, company that's taken the modeling of fractures to a next level. Instead of the 1D or sort of 1.5D models that used to be, they've got a 2.5D model. They're doing some fabulously innovative work helping us to understand how the rocks break from a theoretical point of view. Marvelous opportunity to make sure that Microseismic Inc. is giving you the right answer by giving you something that can really happen. And Garrett is going to talk to us. What is the name of your talk, Garrett?
I don't think I named it. I think it's just Microseismic User Forum.
All right. Well, the whole theme for today is not even on my screen. You see, this is live TV, folks. So this is live TV. Oh, here it is. It's on the bottom. So you should have seen it. Yes, of course. It's using diagnostics to adjust factory mode completions in today's plays. So in other words, we've kind of progressed from one-offs on wells to kind of a factory mode. And these guys are really into, Garrett and our next speaker are really into using diagnostics to understand what's happening with the fracking. And they're going to talk to us about how we maybe should be paying attention to some of the observables in order to do better. Our second speaker is Bill von Gonten, world famous, one of the top 2 or 3 completion engineers in the world, who's working around the world on unconventional plays. And in fact, today, this very day, as he speaks to you, he's in Neuquén, in the Vista offices at Neuquén in Argentina, and he'll be talking from his perspective, sort of responding to what Garrett says and talking to us a little bit about how he sees the plays developing worldwide and his opinions on what we should be using for diagnostics. I always like to have a little bit of a fun fact before we move to the speakers. And Garrett's fun fact is that he likes to dive and chase cars that have gone off bridges into rivers as a rescue diver. Sounds like pretty dangerous work to me, Garrett. I'm not sure your boss, I'm not sure Mark would like you doing that sort of thing. And Bill tells us, oh, he's a rancher, but then everybody in Texas is a rancher. But more importantly, he is an amateur organic moonshiner. Now, this is a public broadcast, and I hope there's nobody from the revenue people who are listening in. I want you to know that Bill is going to talk again. And in fact, a little earlier, we put up a listing of our talks over the next few months. We're trying to do this every month as we work through the program that we put together in January. The QR code there will get you to our website where you can see what talks are coming. And I'm going to put this up at the end of the talk. But without further ado, I want to transfer now and go over to Garrett and have him present his comments. I would tell you that you can write questions in the chat, and then after the two talks are done, we'll have some live chat. You can raise your hand and we can actually get you on the show to ask our authors, our presenters questions. So, Garrett.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here and to be the president of the book and Bill. So what I wanted to start today with was just a review of a little bit of how you introduced ResFrac. So ResFrac is a modeling company. There's a diversity of opinions on modeling, but fundamentally I view it as just trying to make sense of data. We're really good at acquiring data in this industry, but we can leverage that data to get further insights into what's happening in the subsurface. And importantly, once we make sense of what's happened historically, we can then use that to say, what should we do next, or what should we test next? And I emphasize test because there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in everything that we're doing in rocks that are 2 miles under our feet. And so I view it through the lens of the scientific process. And today we're talking about diagnostics. But everyone in this industry, we're engaged in that scientific method. We're identifying challenges, forming hypotheses of how we can improve upon or confront those challenges. And then we go and we test that hypothesis in the field, and we measure the results, and we refine or update our belief of the subsurface and what hypothesis we want to test next. And that's where I think the diagnostics that we're talking about today fit into that workflow. We're refining and getting more detail and informing those hypotheses. And me, I'm biased at, running a modeling company. I'm going to say, well, you should be using those diagnostics and making sense of those in a model, and using that model to inform then what the next hypothesis is that you're going to test. As I said, there's a diversity of opinion. Not everyone's using that workflow, but I'll try to champion it as much as I can. So coming back to those diagnostics, I just want to provide a couple examples of ones in recent history that I think have changed how we operate in the industry or changed our understanding of the rocks. One of which is HFTS2. That was a high-profile DOE-funded project. Oxy was the operating sponsor of that project that collected a host of diagnostics in the Delaware Basin. I'd say one of the more profound results or measurements that came out of the HFTS2 experiments was the height growth that was measured in these fractures. So these wells were in the Delaware Basin, landed in the Wolfcamp A, Wolfcamp XY, but they had a vertical well in the center of the pad. Not sure, does my mouse show up if I? Yeah. So this is a model of that pad. We see this vertical well coming through the center, a little bit more visible now. In that vertical well, they had a fiber optic cable, and we're able to measure the strain events, particularly of the fracture stages adjacent to that vertical well. And at least what was surprising to me, and I think most people in reviewing the data, is that it exhibited fracture heights in excess of 1,500 feet. And I don't think prior to this experiment, that was a popular or verified sort of belief of how these fractures were growing in the Delaware Basin. And that fundamentally changed how we thought about well spacing and stacking in the Delaware Basin and where production was coming from. And by throwing that into a model, we can come up with explanations and then inform, what test we might do next to potentially optimize or improve the economics. Another diagnostic study that came into the public domain a couple of years ago was Exxon's testing in the Bakken, where they drilled additional slant wells adjacent to a fractured and producing well. They used this to make assertions or measurements on on what depleted distances and heights are within the fractures. So as opposed to the prior data set, we're measuring total fracture geometries. Exxon went the next step farther and they installed pressure gauges across these laterals to measure what the extent of depletion is in these fractures that they were creating. And that helped to define this differentiation where your total wetted or hydraulic lengths were much larger than what the depleted lengths were. I'm showing results of these pressure gauges. So you see different groupings of gauges that are not showing depletion, showing a moderate to strong degree of depletion, and then showing a whole lot of depletion. And that really refined our understanding of what is the depleted length of these fractures. And then you compound that with experiments that Hess has done and published, where they're looking at how do those distances change as a function of the frac design, the types of proppants that we're using, the types of fluids. And it's only through these measurements that we can really get that high definition understanding. We can replicate those in a model and then use those models to say, how could we potentially exploit these measurements or these intuitions to do something different or to change the performance of these wells? So finally, I just wanted to end on where I think kind of one of the next frontiers in diagnostics and our understanding of the subsurface is going. I'm going to pull a paper that Mark Zobak and one of his grad students wrote a number of years ago on potential identification of horizontal fractures in the Marcellus. And this topic of horizontal fractures is something that as a company we're hearing more and more, particularly as we go to more frontier basins and as people get more definition on current basins that they are exploring and exploiting. So in this paper, what Dr. Zobak and Ali were looking at were a microseismic data set. They display several wells in the paper, so I encourage you to go and read the paper in its entirety. But I'm just pulling out one of these. It was called Well C in the paper. It's a horizontal well. You can see it's crossing between different landing zones between the lower Marcellus and the zone above. And what they noticed was a correspondence between the height of the microseismic clouds and the landing zones. So as they were toward the toe of this well, and the colored dots here correspond to the stages that had been measured with microseismic, we see in stages 10 through 17, those microseismic events stay collected around the wellbore, showing containment of the fractures, relatively limited fracture heights. And then when the wellbore comes up above into the overlying zone, we see that the microseismic events expand vertically quite significantly. And so one suspicion, we have a strong height barrier that could be potentially containing, or stress barrier rather, that could be containing fractures. Or additionally, there could be a component of horizontal fracturing. And so the authors present that they believe horizontal fracturing here, and they use ISIPs as the additional diagnostic or identification method. So in those same stages that show very short or contained microseismic events, the ISIPs are above the overburden gradient. So depending on where you allocate pressure in terms of tortuosity or net pressure, one solution is to say, well, that's actually representing a net pressure where your fracture pressure has exceeded the overburden. You're lifting the overburden in these stages, as opposed to the heel side of this well, where those ISIPs are now down below the overburden gradient, and that would be consistent with more vertically oriented fractures. So I think it's a fairly compelling argument, and one that we want to continue exploring. As I said, this topic continues to come up more and more. And so I started by talking about that models are a way to integrate these measurements and try to make sense of what's happening in the subsurface. To that degree, we're recently adding the horizontal fracture propagation to our models to do exactly that, to try to understand what's happening in some of these basins where people suspect that there is mixed mode fracturing of both vertical and horizontally oriented fractures. And I think we're going to be able to leverage that to then ask ourselves, how would we drill these wells differently? How would we complete them differently? Should we be avoiding those landing zones that exhibit this behavior, or should we be targeting zones exclusively where we don't think this is happening? And those are open questions that are going to be exciting to explore and will be informed by diagnostics in the coming years. So with that, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Bill to wow you.
It helps if I press the right button. And I want, thanks very much, Garrett. And I want to say that there have been a couple of you out there who've said you can't see the slides. We're testing this at the back end of our office. And if you have seen the video, you'll notice that we are in our office. And Garrett, we're really pleased to have you visiting with us today. And there are a number of the microseismic employees who are sitting in the conference room with us to get the benefit of this talk and what Bill's about to present. Any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat, if you will, and we'll get them to eventually. But Garrett, what you were talking about at the end really interests me. We all know that when we do microseismic analysis, there's kind of this 90-degree uncertainty. If we get a vertical dip slip, the signature and the microseismic data itself would allow us to interpret it as a horizontal rather than vertical. And so we cast about to all of the experts in the world, Mark Zobak being one of them, who at the time when we made this question to him, can there be horizontal fracs? He said, listen, Peter, how can I lift the whole weight of 10,000 feet of the earth up enough to be able to slip the earth sideways on a horizontal frac? And so we just, ever since then, Mark being Mark, we have ever since then just accepted that it's a vertical frac solution we should be taking, not the horizontal. Are you telling me now that Mark has changed his mind?
I am, and I would actually, on our website, we have a recorded video, I believe, from last year's user forum, where Mark's presentation of the forum was an argument for why he thinks horizontal fractures exist in the subsurface.
Wow, I couldn't make your forum last year, and I'm now very, very sorry that I didn't. So all the folks sitting in the room here, and maybe out in Radioland, we're going to have to start looking at this in terms of our solutions and making sure we're picking the right answer. We do have a question from Giovanni Grasselli up in Toronto, who asks, how do you change in the ResFrac model, how do you change the propagation direction horizontal versus vertical? What is the physics behind that change?
So in the models, it's locally evaluated full stress tensor in all three directions. So overburden, SH min, SH max at every time step. And so the model then evaluates which of those is the minimum stress at a given point in time. And so if we go back to that video I had been showing, you'll see that those fractures initially are starting as vertical, but then as the pressure builds and they hit a higher stress zone above as well as in the landing zone, the minimum principal stress becomes the vertical direction, right? As stress shadow builds in that horizontal plane in which the well is landed, eventually right about now, you see that horizontal fracture kick off and you're getting propagation in both directions.
Very interesting. And I would say Giovanni, who asked the question, actually spoke in our booth at Image several years ago on some of the modeling work, and he works with real rocks as opposed to numerical rocks, and he breaks them up in Toronto, and he gave a lecture in our booth where he said, I've seen evidence when I'm breaking rocks, that they do change and they do frack horizontally. So we're going to stop now. Keep asking questions. We're going to go back and have a panel a little bit later. But now we're going to change over and I'm going to give the driving to Bill, who, as I said, is down in Neuquén in Argentina. And we're going to flip to Bill's slides and let Bill take it away. We're going to drive the slides, Bill, so you'll have to say next when you want us to change the slide, okay? Take it away, Bill. Him to speak.
You may have to.
Okay,
Right,
Bill,
now it's
you should be
on.
able to talk now.
All right.
There we are.
Okay, I think y'all have me muted. All right, so sorry for that. All right, so
No worries.
thank y'all for having me today. So what I want to talk about is all aspects. I'm a reservoir engineer by background, and so my focus has been on not only on geomechanics, but the whole thing has been on reservoir engineering and extracting more hydrocarbons from these reservoirs all over the world. You know, if you look at Permian Basin, Eagle Ford, which is what I'm showing here, you know, we have Permian Basin, we have single digit recovery factors. So we need to understand the biggest driver in ultimate recovery is stimulated rock volume, which is the hydraulic fractures. And so we need to understand, why do we have low recovery factors? And so the first aspect of that is the hydraulic fractures. And so going through and understanding the fracture geometry is key. And so when you look at the Eagle Ford, this graph is just showing you Webb and Dimmitt County, some new activity. And the blue sticks are the lower Eagle Ford. And you look at the log, the green on the right track is the hydrocarbon. And there's this extensive column of hydrocarbons from the chalk all the way down to the lower Eagle Ford. And so now what we're doing is we're going in and seeing, okay, with low recovery factors, did our hydraulic fractures get all of this? And so can we do diagnostics to try to understand where are we getting all this? And so we landed lower Eagle Ford wells. Now can we go in and did we get the upper Eagle Ford? So we need to drill wells in the upper Eagle Ford and do diagnostics to see, are the upper and lower Eagle Ford connected? Then drill chalk wells and do the same thing. And so now we've been doing that recently, drilling upper Eagle Ford wells, multiple benches of the chalk. We've drilled 2 chalk benches. Now we're drilling a 3rd chalk bench. Now we're drilling upper Eagle Ford wells. And so this thing's turned in from a single bench development to a 4-bench development. You know, I wish we would have done this 10 years ago. It's a shame we're doing it today, but now it's turned into a 4-bench development. So almost think of it as 3 times the hydrocarbons that what it used to be. So again, we wish we'd have done it a long time ago. So the next slide, please. So what I mean by diagnostics is, you know, if you look at hydraulic fracturing, every stage that's being pumped, there's second by second data of pressure. There's data before you initiate the frac. There's data when you perforate. There's data when you break the reservoir down. There's data while you're pumping. There's data after you stop the pumps. And all that data tells you a lot about the reservoir. It tells you a lot about how it's breaking down. That data can also be captured as you're pumping from offset wells, and you can start to plot that data. And if you think about it, you know, we plot data on a single well, right? We plot pounds of sand per foot. We plot ultimate recovery. And if you put that in a map mode, it's 1 point. But now look at this map. This is every stage is a data point. This is the ISIP data. And look at it. Now it's every stage, you know, so it covers the whole map, right? Now, if you did this for every well, you can map this out 3-dimensionally, you know, by landing zone, it's a extreme amount of data. And you can start to look for trends. How is there trends? Is this data helping you? And so what we're doing with this data now is saying, not only do we come up with a completion design, do we start to change the completion design as we're treating these wells? Historically, we've been in a mode of here's the design, pump the well as designed, and then turn the wells on. And then we look at our production data and say, okay, how did we do? What if we take this data as we're pumping it? We know what this data means and we start to see trends. What if we change the completion design in the middle of the job? I'm not saying drastic changes, but what if we make changes because we know what this data means? And so to me, I see trends in this data, especially when you look at offset wells, older wells. You can see trends. You can see trends of higher pressures, trends of lower pressures, especially when you turn on the data around it. So there's trends in here, and looking at more and more data, I think you can help train what's going on with this. So it's not just one data point per well. Each one of these wells has 60 data points, right? So this is the kind of data that needs to be looked at, along with tracer data, along with microseismic data. Start to overlay all this on top of each other and figure out, this is going to help you with, right, what does the frac look like what Garrett was talking about. As we're fracking as wells, what is the characterization of the frac? Length, height, the characteristics of it. So let's go to the next slide. Look at the next slide. This is what I call supercharge. How are we pressuring up the reservoir? Look at this box right here, this red box. You see the purple on this well, the low, I'm leaking off. Think of this as leak off. I have high leak off. Then all of a sudden I reach this region on this well where this red box is, and I don't have leak off. I'm pressuring up this wellbore. And then I drew this box. You can see the offset wells. They weren't fracked right there, right? Those are where the curved sections were. That makes all the sense in the world, right? That tells you there's a fairway right there of undrained acreage, right? You would never know that. Now you see it because you have all this treating data. So there's so much power, there's so much data to be captured in all this by looking at this data. And then, now you go and you look at the other pads, you can see the same thing, looking at these trends. And so again, looking at this, we should have made changes in these wells as we were treating them to capture this as we're going through and treating them. And we are making those changes. Some of our clients are making changes as we're treating these wells. So let's go to the next slide. So here's a good example of fracture characterization. There's a lot on here, but we put pressures, every well, this is free data. Every well, you have real-time pressure as you're treating wells on a pad. All the offset wells on the pad that are being treated have pressure sensors on them, right? Because everybody wants to know, as I open the wellhead, what am I opening my pressure against, right? And so there's pressure on the casing side. And so what we're watching is, as I'm treating, like on the first one, I'm treating A3. What's the pressure on A2? And it's hard to see on there. A2 is the red well. And I'm seeing, as I'm pumping on A2, my pressures are increasing. Then I go down and all of a sudden I'm pumping A3 again, further down, and all of a sudden I see A1's well and it's increasing. And so the trend of that, do I see an increase immediately? And then the value of that increase is telling me a lot about the distance A3 is from A1, the distance A2 is from A3, the time it takes for those fracs to get there is telling me a lot about the character of that frac. Is this a frac that happens instantaneously, or is this a frac that may be a planar type frac it's more of a material balance? It's reaching that well exactly when it should reach that well in a time dependent, or I have another pad that as soon as I start pumping, instantly I see pressures, right? Then I know I'm going to have wells that are in communication. So this is free data, right? It's already, you're capturing it on your wells, but are you looking at it? So I think the next slide is a zoom in on it. This is just zooming in, A3 and A1. Now you can kind of see as I'm pumping A3, look at A1's pressure. The red well is increasing. So this is what I'm showing about. There's a lot of data that can be captured in this. So my last slide is look what happens when you plot it. Now I'm plotting it. Look at the slide on the right. I'm plotting of what I'm pumping. Where do I see pressure increases? So you can kind of look at this again. It's not one data point. Now it's 60 data points on a map. And I'm looking for trends. And so I look for this trends. Again, overlay microseismic, overlay tracer data, overlay fiber optic, and start to look for these trends. Put it into models, calibrate it with models, and start to put some calibrations to say, what is my proper well spacing? You know, am I landing my upper Eagle Ford wells right, or whatever play you're working, Wolfcamp wells, Vaca Muerta wells, are you landing them right? Do I need to land them higher? Or are they in communication during fracturing? Are they not in communication? And then make changes, right? If I'm like my case of if I'm fracking and I'm taking a hit every time, why do I want to go do 58 more stages of that? Why not make a change? Maybe I need to change my zipper order. Maybe I need to make a change on the fly. And so to me, this is all low cost, almost free data that just needs to be looked at real time. And so this is what we're doing, trying to squeeze more out of the data to understand the stimulated rock volume, because it's the biggest driver in our recovery. When you look at recovery efficiency of an unconventional low permeability well, the stimulated rock volume, the 10% change in stimulated rock volume is almost a 10% change in ultimate recovery. They're almost linear. And so everything we do here drives the ultimate recovery. And so we've been spending a lot of time focusing on this, trying to squeeze more and more data out of this. And just looking at an individual well, again, take all of your frac data and start to plot it three-dimensionally. And I think you'll get more out of the trends this way. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bill. Long time ago, when I was first getting into microseismic monitoring of wells, I remember I went to a conference and there was an Exxon geophysicist who said microseismic is never going to take off because you're trying to tell the engineers how to make changes to their wells on the fly. And my drilling engineer told me he wasn't going to let no pointy-headed geophysicist tell him how to change what he was doing with his fracs. And that once the train left the station, it was on its road. What I'm hearing you say is that there's valuable data you can get almost for free that you can analyze in real time and be changing your wells, either next well or next stage. Are people really doing that today? And is it making a difference in your recovery?
Yeah, people are doing it, and I think we're going to start to see that it is making a change. Why not, Peter? I mean, we're single-digit recovery factors, right? I mean, why not, right? We've got to do better. We're leaving 90% of the hydrocarbons behind. Why not? We've got to do better. What's the downside?
So have you, well, it's cost. And these days we know cost is everything, or it seems to be. But have you got any, off the top of your head, can you say either or postulate what that increase in recovery might be? Is it a factor of 2? Is it 50%? Or?
No. We've taken that data and then redesigned the next pad, and it's increased recovery 25%. Now we're taking that data and we're going to start implementing it to make changes on the fly.
Wow. So Garrett, can your modeling contribute to this? Can you do models on the fly? Are they fast enough for people to be able to respond?
Well, I think even before understanding whether they're fast enough, what the challenge is to real time, as we've seen it, is to make sure that we're making the right decision, right? Like you can make the wrong decision faster and maybe not gain anything. And so I think that is where the modeling comes in, is having a thesis that's backed by some sort of justification for we're going to make X change because of Y physics or Y reason. And that's where, you know, for a full physics model, we're challenged to run on those timescales, as I'm sure Bill can relate to. And I think that's where the data analytics and machine learning models get coupled with physics-based models, is to have something that is able to be evaluated in real time to make a recommendation. It's probably not a full three-dimensional physics-based model, but it's probably a machine learning model that's been trained on a body of data and modeling that was done prior to the initiation of your activities. That'd be my first guess on how that gets done.
Garrett's right. You run the model. Let's just say I'm in the middle of fracking and my ISIPs are too high and I need to lower it. You've run the model before to know, okay, I need to reduce stress. And you've run the model before to say, I increase cluster spacing, I change the zipper order, and this would decrease stress. And so you've already known that, so you know what to do. You're not in the middle of the fly going, let me try this, let me try that. You have a set plan, right? If this happens, do this. And the modeling tells you this is what you should do to reduce stress. That's where the modeling comes in, is tells you what would you do to reduce stress or to reduce half length, things like that. The model, you can run all kinds of scenarios to help you with that. I'm not saying you make changes on the fly, they're just random.
And I wasn't putting words in your mouth.
No. I mean, that's why we use the model, right? It's to help us with what do we do to make changes, right?
Well, and I think that's where the coupling can help as well, right? Because you can run a number of discrete cases ahead of time, but there may still be the ability to interpolate in between your prior cases, right? So you ran in the modeling workflow using your ISIP example. Let's say you run cases where you saw ISIPs escalating by 20%, 30%, 40%. And then in actuality, what you see is an ISIP escalation 25%. That's where some additional layer of modeling can help interpolate in between your previously run cases. But maybe even before we jump to that level, we should start with the first one, which is just have done any modeling beforehand to understand what your decision would be.
So I do want to say that this is an open discussion at this point. If someone would like to make a comment or ask a question, if you hit the up in the upper part of your screen, if you hit raise your hand, then we think we have the technology where we can allow you to speak and contribute to the conversation. But in the meantime, Garrett, what would be your opinion in the context of this discussion as the diagnostics that we should be looking at? But both of you, what are the diagnostics? Bill's talked about ISIP, but what are some of the other diagnostics we should be looking at in order to respond to what's really happening in the earth and do better?
I think the diagnostic selection should be made in the frame of reference of what is it that we're trying to solve or to measure, right? Because anymore there's more technologies available than are economic or practical to run, certainly on every well or even on discrete measurement pads. I think ISIP's a great example, as Bill's drawing upon, as something that can be regularized or routinized and used across all wells. But it's not going to answer all questions, right? And so a selection of technologies that we've found to be very insightful are things like perforation imaging. So dark vision, EV cam, I think there's a selection of others now, of understanding the impacts of perforation orientation, how erosion might be changing bias across the stage, and then putting that in a model, understanding can we do something with perforation orientation to affect a change and get more homogeneity in stimulation or better uniformity across that stage, if that's the goal. Fiber optic strain is a favorite of ours. I think microseismic, as I was showing in the identification of horizontal fractures, adds definition to a lot of these data sets. Pressure interference testing, I would put in that category of ISIPs is maybe something we should be doing on every pad. When we bring on pads, just spacing wells by 6 or 12 hours can add a lot of information if we're measuring the pressure on the shut-in wells as we bring the adjacent wells online. So those would be ones that come to the forefront as I think about diagnostics.
Bill, have you got anything to add in terms of diagnostics?
No, the best data we've gotten recently is the pressure interference. We run downhole pressure gauges on almost every pad in South Texas, and we get live data 24/7 for years, and it's invaluable. It answers not only the day one interference, it answers month 3 interference and month 12 interference, and trust me, it's dynamic.
And if I'm just pulling on that thread, if you have the ability to keep a gauge down there, that's even better. About 18 months ago, we published a paper with Chesapeake at the time, I guess now Expand, looking at pressure interference in the Haynesville and how it's very dynamic through the life of the well. Right, the wells are initially connected and in communication with each other, and then over the process of about 18-24 months, that connection is lost and they start operating as independent systems. And that tells us a lot about what's happening in the subsurface, but also then informs what is the optimal well spacing. Should we be doing something on well spacing? And then you can think, if you make that into a large database, you can start correlating it with things like completion design and see, if we're pumping a 5,000 pound per foot job versus a 3,000 pound per foot job, are we changing those effective fracture lengths or the duration at which we're going to remain connected to the neighboring wells?
Perfect. So we have Corey Fair from Calgary who's raised his hand, and I think we've unmuted you, Corey. So you have the floor if you want to contribute to this discussion, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the forum, Peter. Thanks to everybody at Microseismic for putting together these great talks. And Garrett and Bill, thanks for your presentations. Those are fantastic. My question is about geomechanics. On the foundational level of what's happening in the subsurface, how well do we understand the geomechanical impacts of stress shadowing, interference, the strengths that are happening and changing from one point to another within these horizontals? Or, and so that's I guess one question. The second would be, is it only seeing a pressure change from one well to the child, for instance, that Bill was just referring to? Is that all we care about, or is there a deeper understanding yet to be gained when it comes to the geomechanical foundations of the subsurface? Thanks very much, guys.
I can answer that. We don't know anything. So that's something that all we're trying to do, this is my opinion, is help characterize. It is so complex. I mean, we're putting models together, but it is so complex. In my opinion, there is a vertical component, there's a horizontal component. We can probably never model what's really going on down there, but we hope to come up with something that's representing what's going on. But the thing that we feel strongly is it is dynamic. Stage 1 is changing the rock versus stage 50. The more, this is an incompressible system, and you're injecting millions of gallons of water, and you think at stage 1 behaves like stage 50. Where does all this water go? Stress is changing, and so I think this is a completely dynamic system, and I think the fracture changing as we move along the lateral, especially as we put 12 wells into the ground at the same time on a pad. I think it's becoming complex, and we're trying to capture that the best way we can. And so looking at the pressure that's why I'm saying, looking at each stage, the ISIPs, the supercharged, the wellhead pressures, everything stage by stage, and then trying to capture that mental picture and then putting it into a model to help kind of guide the model is what we need to be trying to do to try to capture what's going on down there.
Sort of along those lines, Garrett, Iris Wang, just after you were talking on your Marcellus example, when you were showing where there was height growth towards the heel of the well, and then it went into the different horizon that it's more contained. She was asking, in particular for that case, were there other wells on the pad that were being completed simultaneously to that well, and could that have been contributed to having the height growth towards the heel as opposed to later on, those other ones that were more contained? I guess that's earlier.
Great question, Iris. I'm not sure if the paper mentions the sequencing of wells or not. I presume they were zippered, but again, these were wells from several years ago, so perhaps they were fractured sequentially. But in the paper, they do show two additional wells, one that's immediately adjacent and one that's a little bit farther away, I think called well D and well B in the paper, and they exhibit similar behaviors. And so the presumption in the paper was that this was a behavior related to the landing zone. And going back to our user forum from last year, Mark Zobak and his students have, for the last several years, been studying the viscoplastic stress relaxation stress derivation. And so in a softer rock, the stress approaches your overburden through time. And so they think that that particular zone, the stress is relaxing to the point where it's getting close to the overburden. That's why we're seeing that behavior. Certainly, stress interaction from zippering wells and fractures crossing could perhaps exacerbate that behavior.
So more lithologic than the result of an adjacent well, maybe.
Yeah, with the caveat that we should read the paper.
That's the best data we have at this point.
Yeah.
So Thomas DeBoer wrote in and said, very interesting work. From our experience, operators are slowly becoming more open to real-time changes. That's great. We have been able to implement mitigation strategies in real time during an active stage that have been shown to stop pressure communication between the parent and child wells, but certainly we need a deeper understanding of the mechanism causing these pressure interactions to ensure we make the correct decisions. Cool. The question then is, in regard to the mixed mode fracturing that you've shown, have you identified changes in the primary mode, horizontal versus vertical, along the lateral as the in situ stresses change due to successive stages?
I don't have a case study to point to. I think this is all new, but brainstorming some things, right? As cluster spacings are reduced, the stress shadowing from adjacent fractures is going to be larger. So perhaps that now we're getting to the integration, maybe what both Bill and I were saying is watching those treating pressures, watching those ISIPs as we start approaching, maybe you're dynamically increasing cluster spacing or allowing for more leak off in between stages a lot, and say waiting 4 hours in between stages instead of 2, and is that going to make an impact? But I think that really has to be informed from the modeling side. Is that going to be sufficient? Do we expect that to make a change, or is there some other change that we need to be effectuating?
Bill, do you have anything to say on that topic?
No, I'm good.
Okay, that's all right. Corey, I see your hand is up. Is it still up, or do you have something more you want to add?
Yeah, it's not still up. Just another comment, and I'll make it quick because there's probably some other questions coming in. I'm going to be in Houston this week, and it would be fantastic to meet with Garrett and Bill while I'm there in person. But I'll talk to you about that later on, Peter. Thank you.
Oh, okay. We're setting up a date.
Yes,
That's
sir.
cool. So I don't see any other hands raised. I don't know as I have anything else in the chat other than a number of thank yous are coming in. So I think what we'll do is we'll give Bill first you and then Corey just 30 seconds to sum up, and we'll close off and give people back a few minutes of their life. So Bill, any closing remarks?
Sure. No, thank you for the opportunity, and I think it's exciting times. I think the industry now is starting to see that a little bit of science now we can advance our learnings, and we've got to get better at getting more hydrocarbons from these reservoirs. And so we've gone through a period of drill and get production up and, provide dividends to our investors. And I kind of see that is changing a little bit, which is exciting to us, because the low recovery factors and efficiencies are low. And so I think it's going to reach an exciting period to finally to be able to see if we can't do a little more science and try to get more recoveries from these reservoirs and apply some different techniques, whether it's modeling, microseismic tracers, you name it. I think it's all going to benefit to try to see if we can understand hydraulic fractures. What do they look like? How do they behave in these rocks? I think there's a strong horizontal component in every play, maybe not in every play, but I think they're more prevalent than we think they are. And so I think that's exciting that we can finally maybe try to understand them and model them. And so I think it's going to be an advancement that we can start to go back and get more from these reservoirs, and then go internationally and help some of these players with this technology. So I think it's going to be a good time for our industry.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear, Bill. I have to say that since about 2015 or 16, when the industry changed to a value instead of a growth industry, and when the investors, the stockholders, people on the board started saying return money to the stockholders and don't worry about science, and people stopped drying their sand and people stopped guiding their wells quite so much, and well, they didn't do as much microseismic as they used to. It's good to hear that in your opinion the winds may be changing just a little bit.
That's Bill's opinion, okay?
Yeah, I understand. Well, I'm going to light a candle afterwards that you're right. Garrett?
Well, I just build off some of Bill's comments, and I'm continually in awe of this industry and what we're able to achieve, and the commitment to continuous improvement. That we're not getting worse day to day; we're getting better, and we're seeing some really novel applications of these diagnostics to improve that understanding and to improve our performance. And I think there is that I won't maybe quite characterize it as a tide change right now in diagnostics, but I think there is a greater appreciation, perhaps correlated to the M&A cycle right now of larger companies that are allocating more effort to really getting it right. And we'll never have it perfect, but at least we can do better than yesterday. And that's what's so awesome about this industry.
Well, great. I will tell you, I'm the guy who takes the spatula and gets the last little drip of soup out of the bottom of the can. And I hate like hell that we're getting 4, 5, 6% recovery from these reservoirs of all that precious oil. I'd like to do better. And I think you guys are on to how we do better. So with that, I'm going to close off this session. I want to thank you, Bill, and you, Garrett. I actually have somewhere here a bag with a gift. Now, what I'd like you to do is take it out, because
This is why I came in person.
I know, and we've got one here for you too, Bill, that we're going to send to you. But it's no, don't worry about the card. That's just it's.
So see, my mom told me.
What we've got is a light bulb that represents your contributions to this industry, and we've got the same thing. We're going to send it to you, Bill.
Okay.
Light bulb with a little bit of a stand. I want to, while he's getting that out, I want to thank the audience for attending today. We had a good attendance from all around the world. I don't know, can you see that, people? Yeah. And if you click on that QR code, you will see the schedule for what we're going to show in the next months. We don't have one listed for March, but we're hoping we'll do one on the last Thursday at 9 o'clock in March. We'll be emailing you to let you know about that. As I said, you can take the QR code to register for the next talk or just log in on that day. We'll make sure you know about it. And finally, all of these are being recorded and they will be available on our website as we go through. Again, thanks to our speakers, thanks to my audience here with us, and thanks to my audience out in Radio Land. And maybe we'll see you next month. Goodbye for now. Bye-bye.